I need you to understand something. What I'm about to share with you is the kind of thing that changes a man from the inside out. The kind of thing that makes you question everything you thought you knew about love, about loyalty, and about the people you trust the most. If you stay with me until the end, you will understand why I say that the worst day of my life turned out to be the day I finally learned the truth. And trust me, the truth was something I never could have predicted. So if you're new here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and drop a like on this video because stories like this one need to be heard. Now let me take you back to the beginning. My name is David Alford. I was 43 years old when my wife, Claire, passed away. She died on a Tuesday morning in October, the kind of morning where the sky is heavy and gray and the air smells like wet leaves and something ending. She had been sick for almost 2 years. Pancreatic cancer. The doctors told us from the very start that the odds were not in her favor, but Claire was the kind of woman who never accepted odds. She fought with everything she had. She did the chemo. She did the experimental treatments. She smiled through the nausea and the weight loss and the days when she could barely lift her head off the pillow. She did all of that not because she was afraid to die, but because she said she was not ready to leave me and our daughter, Sophie, alone. Sophie was 12 when her mother was diagnosed. 14 when we buried her. I remember the morning Claire died with a clarity that still cuts me. I was sitting in the chair beside her hospital bed. I had been sleeping there for 3 nights straight. The nurses had stopped asking me to go home. They just brought me a blanket and a cup of coffee every morning. That Tuesday, I woke up to the sound of the heart monitor flatling. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just reached over and took her hand. It was still warm. And I sat there holding it for 20 minutes before I let the nurses come in. I needed those 20 minutes. I needed to say goodbye in my own way, in the quiet, where no one else could hear what I whispered to her. The funeral was scheduled for that Saturday. Claire had planned most of it herself. She had done that about 6 months before she died, during one of her good weeks. She sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and wrote out exactly what she wanted. The songs. The flowers. The readings. She even wrote a letter to be read aloud. She told me she didn't want me to have to make those decisions while I was grieving. That was Claire. Even while dying, she was still taking care of me. The church was full that Saturday. Claire was beloved. She was a second-grade teacher at Willowbrook Elementary, and she had touched the lives of hundreds of children over 17 years. Parents came who I hadn't seen in a decade. Former students, now in college, drove hours to be there. Her 3 sisters were there, sitting in the front row, their faces red and swollen. Her mother, Evelyn, sat between them, rigid and silent, clutching a tissue she never used. My own parents were there. My brother, Marcus, stood beside me the entire time, his hand on my shoulder like an anchor. But there was one person at that funeral who should not have been there. And his presence is what set off a chain of events that nearly destroyed me and ultimately saved me. His name was Raymond Cross. I noticed him during the service. He was sitting in the back row, alone. He was a tall man, mid-50s maybe, with silver hair and a dark overcoat that looked expensive. I didn't recognize him. In a church filled with familiar faces, his stood out precisely because it was unfamiliar. He was crying. Not the polite, restrained crying of a distant acquaintance. He was weeping. His shoulders shook. His face was buried in his hands. Whoever this man was, his grief was enormous. I didn't have the bandwidth to think about it in that moment. I was trying to hold myself together for Sophie. She was sitting next to me, wearing the black dress her mother had bought her the previous spring, and she was trembling like a leaf in a storm. I put my arm around her and pulled her close and whispered that her mom was proud of her. I don't know if that was the right thing to say. I don't know if there is a right thing to say to a 14-year-old girl at her mother's funeral. But it was all I had. After the service, we gathered at the reception hall attached to the church. People brought food. Mountains of food. Casseroles and sandwich trays and cakes and pies. Someone had made Claire's favorite, lemon bars with powdered sugar on top, and I almost lost it when I saw them sitting on the table. Claire used to make those every Sunday. The house always smelled like lemons and butter on Sunday afternoons. That smell was gone now. The house smelled like nothing. Like absence. I was standing near the entrance, shaking hands and accepting condolences, when I saw Raymond Cross again. He was lingering near the doorway, hesitant, as if he wasn't sure he had the right to be there. Our eyes met. He looked startled, almost guilty. Then he started walking toward me. He extended his hand. His grip was firm but his fingers were trembling. Up close, I could see that his eyes were bloodshot and his face was deeply lined, the face of a man who carried heavy things. "David," he said. "My name is Raymond Cross. I was a friend of Claire's. I am so deeply sorry for your loss." I thanked him. I asked him how he knew my wife. He hesitated. There was a pause that lasted just a beat too long, the kind of pause that plants a seed of unease in your chest. "We worked together years ago," he said. "Before she started teaching. At the marketing firm downtown. She was a wonderful person." I nodded. Claire had worked at a marketing firm for 2 years right after college, before she went back to school to get her teaching degree. She rarely talked about that time. She always said it wasn't for her, that she knew after the first month she was meant to be in a classroom. I had never heard her mention a Raymond Cross. He pressed a small envelope into my hand. "She asked me to give this to you," he said. After. The word hit me like a fist. After she died, he meant. My wife had given this man, this stranger, something to deliver to me after her death. Why? Why not give it to her sisters? To my brother? To me directly? Why entrust something to a man I had never heard of? I looked down at the envelope. My name was written on it in Claire's handwriting. That familiar, slightly slanted script that I had seen on grocery lists and birthday cards and love notes tucked into my briefcase. My throat tightened. "Thank you," I managed to say. Raymond nodded, squeezed my hand once more, and left. I watched him walk out the door and disappear into the gray October afternoon. I didn't open the envelope that day. I couldn't. I put it in the inside pocket of my suit jacket, and I went home, and I helped Sophie get ready for bed, and I sat in the dark living room alone, staring at the wall, and I did not open it. I was afraid. I am not ashamed to admit that. I was afraid of what my dead wife had to tell me through a stranger's hands. 3 days passed. Sophie went back to school. The house was unbearably quiet. I had taken 2 weeks off from my job as a civil engineer, and now I regretted it because the silence was oppressive. Every room held Claire's ghost. Her reading glasses on the nightstand. Her cardigan draped over the back of the kitchen chair. Her shoes by the front door, still in the position she had left them the last time she walked out of this house under her own power, 7 months ago. On the 3rd day, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, 3 pages long, written in Claire's careful handwriting. I sat at the kitchen table and read it, and by the time I reached the 2nd page, I was sobbing so hard I could barely see the words. The letter began simply. She told me she loved me. She told me I had been the greatest joy of her life. She told me that marrying me was the best decision she ever made, and that Sophie was the most beautiful thing she had ever helped create. She told me not to let grief swallow me whole. She told me to keep living, to keep laughing, to let Sophie see that it was possible to survive the loss of someone you love. Then the letter shifted. Claire wrote that there was something she had never told me, something she had carried for 20 years, and that she couldn't leave this world without making sure I knew the truth. She said she owed me that. She said she owed Sophie that. 20 years ago, Claire wrote, when she was 23 and working at the marketing firm, she had been in a relationship before me. I knew that. She had mentioned an ex-boyfriend from that period, someone she dated briefly before we met. What she had never told me was that the relationship had been serious. And that it had ended because she discovered she was pregnant. My hands were shaking. I set the letter down and pressed my palms flat against the table, trying to steady myself. Then I picked it up and kept reading. Claire wrote that she had been terrified. She was 23, barely making rent, and the relationship was already falling apart. The man, she wrote, was not ready to be a father. He told her that plainly. She felt she had no support and no way forward. She made the decision to place the baby for adoption. She gave birth to a boy in March, 20 years ago, and she held him for 1 hour before the adoption agency took him. She named him Daniel. She never told me. In 17 years of marriage, she never told me about Daniel. I felt 100 things at once. Shock. Confusion. Hurt. A strange, aching compassion for the 23-year-old version of my wife, alone and scared, making an impossible choice. And underneath all of it, a question that burned: why was she telling me now? The third page answered that. Claire wrote that 6 months ago, Daniel had found her. He had used one of those DNA ancestry services and tracked down his biological mother. He reached out to her through an email, tentative and respectful. Claire wrote that she was overwhelmed with emotion. She wanted to tell me immediately, but she was also in the middle of a brutal round of chemotherapy, and she was terrified of how I would react, and she didn't want to add one more crisis to a life that was already buckling under the weight of crisis. So she met with Daniel in secret. 3 times. At a coffee shop downtown. She wrote that he was kind and intelligent and that he had her eyes. She wrote that seeing him was the most bittersweet experience of her life because she was meeting her son for the first time and she knew she was dying and would not get to know him the way she wanted to. And then she wrote the part that connected everything. Raymond Cross was Daniel's adoptive father. Raymond had come to the funeral because his son's biological mother had died. He had come to pay respects on behalf of Daniel, who, Claire wrote, was too emotionally overwhelmed to attend. Daniel was 20 years old, a junior in college, and he had only known his birth mother for 6 months before cancer took her from him. He was grieving a woman he had barely begun to know. Claire's final request in the letter was this: she asked me to find Daniel. She asked me to welcome him. She asked me to tell Sophie that she had a brother. And she asked me to forgive her for keeping this secret. She wrote, "I was not hiding him from you because I didn't trust you. I was hiding him because I was ashamed. I was ashamed that I gave away my child, and I was ashamed that I couldn't tell the man I loved most in the world. You deserved better, David. You always deserved better than what I was able to give." I sat at that kitchen table for a very long time after I finished the letter. The lemon-colored light of late afternoon crept across the floor and faded into evening, and still I sat there. I was angry. I won't pretend I wasn't. 17 years of marriage, and she had kept this from me. I thought I knew everything about her. I thought we had the kind of marriage where secrets didn't exist. Finding out that I was wrong, finding out after she was dead and I couldn't even talk to her about it, was a particular kind of agony. But alongside the anger, something else was growing. Something that felt like understanding. I thought about Claire at 23. I thought about what it must have been like to make that decision alone. I thought about the shame she carried for 2 decades, the silent weight of it, how she must have looked at Sophie sometimes and thought about the child she gave away. I thought about how she met Daniel while her own body was failing, how she must have sat across from him in that coffee shop and seen the face of the boy she held for 1 hour 20 years ago, and how she must have wanted to scream at the cruelty of the timing. I was angry, yes. But I also loved her. Death does not erase love. Nothing erases love. It took me 2 weeks to call Raymond Cross. His number was written on the back of the envelope. When he answered, his voice was cautious. I told him I had read the letter. There was a long silence. Then he said, "Daniel wants to meet you. If you're willing." I was not sure I was willing. I was not sure of anything. But Claire had asked me. And I had spent 17 years trying to give that woman everything she asked for. I wasn't going to stop now just because she was gone. We arranged to meet at a restaurant, a neutral space. I went alone. I sat in a booth near the window and waited, my leg bouncing under the table. When the door opened and Daniel walked in, I understood immediately what Claire had meant when she wrote that he had her eyes. He did. The same deep brown, the same slight upward tilt at the corners. He was tall and thin with dark hair that fell across his forehead, and he moved with a nervous energy that reminded me of Sophie when she was anxious. He slid into the booth across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "Thank you for agreeing to see me. I know this must be strange." Strange. That was an understatement so massive it almost made me laugh. I was sitting across from my dead wife's secret son. Strange didn't begin to cover it. But I looked at this young man, this boy who had grown up not knowing where he came from, who had finally found his biological mother only to lose her to cancer within months, and my heart broke for him. Whatever confusion and hurt I was feeling, he was feeling something just as deep. He had lost someone too. Someone he never even got the chance to fully know. We talked for 2 hours. He told me about his life. Raymond and his wife, Linda, had adopted him when he was 3 days old. They were good people. They gave him a loving home. He had a happy childhood. But there was always a question in him, a quiet wondering about where he came from and why he was given away. When he turned 18, he started searching. It took him 2 years to find Claire. He told me about their 3 meetings. The first one, he said, they both cried for almost the entire time. The second one, Claire brought photos. Photos of her life, of me, of Sophie. She told Daniel about his half-sister. She told him about the family he had, even though he didn't know it yet. The third meeting was the hardest because Claire was visibly declining, and they both knew their time was limited. "She talked about you a lot," Daniel said. "She said you were the most decent man she'd ever known. She said she didn't deserve you." My eyes stung. "She was wrong about that," I said. The hardest part was telling Sophie. I agonized over it for days. She was 14, grieving her mother, trying to navigate high school while carrying a weight no child should have to carry. How was I supposed to add this to her burden? But Claire had asked me to. And Sophie deserved the truth. I told her on a Sunday evening. We were sitting on the couch, eating takeout Chinese food because neither of us had the energy to cook. I turned off the television and said, "Sophie, there's something I need to tell you. Something about your mom." She looked at me with those eyes, Claire's eyes, and I saw the fear in them. She was afraid of more bad news. She had gotten so much bad news in her young life that she had developed an instinct for it, a brace for impact reflex that no teenager should have. I told her everything. I showed her the letter. I let her read it at her own pace. She read it twice. Then she set it down and stared at the coffee table for a long time. "I have a brother," she said finally. "Yes. And Mom never told us?" "No." She was quiet again. Then she said something that gutted me with its simplicity and its grace. She said, "She must have been so scared, Dad. She must have been so scared to tell us." 14 years old, and she understood something that had taken me weeks to arrive at. Claire was scared. That was the heart of it. Not deception. Not betrayal. Fear. The deep, paralytic fear of being judged by the people you love most. Sophie wanted to meet Daniel. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask for time to process. She said, "Can I meet him? He's my brother." I arranged it. We met at our house. I wanted it to be on our turf, somewhere Sophie felt safe. When Daniel walked through the front door, Sophie stared at him for about 5 seconds. Then she walked up to him and hugged him. She just hugged him. No words. Just a 14-year-old girl wrapping her arms around a 20-year-old stranger who shared her mother's blood. Daniel looked at me over her shoulder, and his face crumpled, and he started crying, and then Sophie started crying, and then I was crying too, standing in the foyer of my own house, watching 2 of Claire's children hold each other for the first time. The months that followed were not easy. I want to be honest about that because I think it's important. There is a temptation in stories like this to wrap things up neatly, to say that we all became one big happy family overnight. We didn't. There were awkward dinners and stilted conversations. There were moments when I looked at Daniel and felt a flash of resentment, not toward him but toward Claire, for leaving me to navigate this alone. There were moments when Sophie struggled with the idea that her mother had kept such a monumental secret. There were moments when Daniel felt like an outsider, unsure of his place in a family that was still raw with grief. But we kept showing up. That's the thing. We kept showing up for each other. Daniel came to Sophie's school play in December. He sat in the audience next to me and watched her perform, and when she took her bow, he clapped louder than anyone. Sophie started texting Daniel regularly. At first it was small things, memes and song recommendations. Then it became deeper, conversations about their mother, questions about what she was like, a shared attempt to piece together the full picture of a woman they both loved and both felt they didn't know completely. Raymond and I developed an unexpected friendship. We would meet for coffee every couple of weeks. He told me about raising Daniel, about the joys and challenges of adoption, about the day Daniel told him he wanted to search for his birth mother and how Raymond had supported him even though part of him was terrified of what it might mean. Raymond was a good man. Claire had chosen well when she placed her son with his family. About 8 months after the funeral, I was cleaning out Claire's closet. I had been putting it off for as long as I could, but the time had come.